April 18th, 1943. 600 miles northwest of Guadalcanal, 18 Republic P-38. Lightning fighters cut through the dawn sky at wavetop altitude. Major John Mitchell checked his watch 0734 hours. In exactly 1 minute, if their calculations were correct, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's transport would appear on the horizon. The man who had orchestrated Pearl Harbor was flying directly into their trap. Lieutenant Rex Barber tightened his grip on the control yoke, feeling the twin Allison engines thrumming beneath him. Behind him, 17 other Lightnings maintained radio silence, their distinctive twin-boom silhouettes skimming just 50 feet above the Pacific swells. They had been flying for 2 hours and 14 minutes, navigating by dead reckoning across empty ocean toward a rendezvous with destiny. What happened in the next 4 minutes would validate everything American engineers believed about twin-engine fighter design and shatter Japanese confidence in their ability to protect even their most valuable leaders. The Lightning's twin engines weren't just power plants. They were the key to reaching the unreachable, striking the untouchable, and proving that American industrial philosophy could project lethal force across distances that defied imagination. But to understand why this mission succeeded so completely, we must first understand what the Japanese believed impossible. In 1943, the Imperial Japanese Navy operated under tactical assumptions that had served them brilliantly for 18 months. Their Zero fighters, single-engine marvels of lightweight engineering, dominated Pacific skies through superior maneuverability and range. Japanese pilots had been taught that twin-engine fighters were inherently flawed, too heavy, too complex, too vulnerable. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Japanese had studied American aircraft development with keen interest and growing contempt. Early twin-engine fighters like the Lockheed P-38 appeared to validate every prejudice Japanese engineers held. Twin engines meant double the complexity, double the failure points, double the weight. Single-engine fighters, they believed, would always outmaneuver their twin-engine opponents in the close-quarters combat that characterized Pacific air battles. Admiral Yamamoto himself embodied this confidence. The architect of Pearl Harbor had spent considerable time in the United States during the 1920s and 30s, studying at Harvard and serving as a naval attaché in Washington. He understood American industrial capacity better than most Japanese leaders, but he also believed that American engineering philosophy emphasized quantity over quality, mass production over elegant efficiency. The Zero represented everything Japanese aviation engineers valued. At just over 5,000 pounds, it was nearly 3,000 pounds lighter than the P-38 Lightning. Its Nakajima Sakai radial engine, while producing only 950 horsepower compared to the Lightning's combined 2,600 horsepower, drove the aircraft to exceptional range and climb performance. Most critically, the Zero could turn inside any American fighter, allowing Japanese pilots to dictate the terms of engagement. This tactical doctrine had proven devastatingly effective. At Pearl Harbor, Zeros had swept American fighters from the sky. During the Philippines campaign, they had destroyed entire squadrons. At the Java Sea, Wake Island, and across the Southwest Pacific, Japanese pilots flying Zeros had established air superiority wherever they appeared. By early 1943, experienced Japanese pilots had accumulated hundreds of flight hours in combat, developing skills that American pilots, still learning their trade, could rarely match. The Imperial, Japanese Navy's confidence extended beyond individual aircraft performance to strategic assumptions about American capabilities. Japanese intelligence had carefully studied the distances involved in Pacific operations. From their bases in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea, they calculated that American fighters lacked the range to threaten Japanese strongholds. Even if the Americans developed longer-range aircraft, the complexity of navigation over empty ocean made precision strikes virtually impossible. Admiral Yamamoto's inspection tour of forward bases in April 1943 reflected this confidence. He would fly from Rabaul to Balale airfield in a Mitsubishi G4M bomber, escorted by 6 Zero fighters from the 204th Air Group. The route took them over 500 miles of ocean controlled entirely by Japanese forces. No American aircraft, they believed, could possibly reach them. The Japanese had good reason for this assumption. Previous American fighter operations had been limited by fuel consumption and navigation challenges. The Grumman F-4F Wildcat, the Navy's primary carrier fighter, had a maximum range of barely 800 miles. Even with external fuel tanks, it couldn't operate effectively more than 300 miles from its base. The Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, used extensively by Army Air Forces in the Southwest Pacific, faced similar limitations. Twin-engine aircraft like the Lockheed P-38 Lightning possessed theoretical range advantages, but Japanese analysts dismissed them as operationally irrelevant. Twin engines, they argued, consumed fuel at nearly double the rate of comparable single-engine fighters. The additional weight of twin power plants, dual cooling systems, and complex fuel distribution reduced practical range despite larger fuel capacity. More importantly, the mechanical complexity made twin-engine fighters unsuitable for extended over-water flights, where single-engine reliability was paramount. Japanese pilots had encountered P-38 Lightnings in combat and developed tactics specifically designed to exploit their perceived weaknesses. The Lightning's size made it an easy target for experienced Zero pilots who could turn inside its wider turning radius and attack from angles the American pilots couldn't match. Its twin-boom configuration, while aerodynamically efficient, created structural vulnerabilities that cannon fire could exploit. Most critically, Japanese pilots had learned that P-38 pilots often flew cautiously, reluctant to risk their expensive, complex aircraft in aggressive maneuvers. These tactical observations reinforced Japanese strategic assumptions. American aircraft might possess superior firepower and armor protection, but they lacked the aggressive spirit that won air battles. Japanese pilots, trained in the samurai tradition of close combat and personal sacrifice, believed themselves inherently superior to American aviators, who relied on technological advantages rather than skill and courage. The Imperial Japanese Navy's intelligence services had tracked American aircraft development throughout 1942 and early 1943. They noted the P-38's gradual deployment to Pacific theaters, but dismissed its significance. Reports from combat zones suggested that while the Lightning possessed impressive speed and firepower, it remained vulnerable to well-coordinated Zero attacks. Japanese pilots consistently reported successful engagements against P-38 seconds, reinforcing high command confidence in existing tactical doctrine. This confidence shaped operational planning throughout the Japanese Pacific Empire. Bases like Rabaul, with its complex of 5 airfields and over 300 aircraft, were positioned based on calculated American fighter ranges. Shipping routes were planned to remain beyond American fighter escort capability. High-value targets like Admiral Yamamoto himself moved freely within areas deemed safe from American air attack. The technological assumptions underlying Japanese confidence ran deeper than simple aircraft performance comparisons. Japanese engineering philosophy emphasized elegance, efficiency, and the elimination of unnecessary complexity. The Zero's legendary range over 1,500 miles with external fuel tanks had been achieved through ruthless weight reduction. Every component was scrutinized, every ounce of excess material eliminated. This philosophy extended to pilot training and tactical doctrine. Japanese pilots learned to fight with minimal fuel reserves, knowing that their aircraft's efficiency would carry them home. They mastered formation flying techniques that minimized fuel consumption while maximizing tactical flexibility. Most importantly, they developed the skills necessary to defeat opponents through superior flying rather than superior equipment. American aircraft, by contrast, seemed to embody everything Japanese engineers considered wasteful. The P-38 Lightning weighed nearly 8,000 pounds at maximum takeoff weight, more than 50% heavier than a Zero. Its twin Allison V1710 engines, while powerful, consumed fuel at rates that Japanese analysts calculated would limit practical combat radius to little more than existing single-engine fighters, despite theoretical range advantages. The Lightning's armament arrangement particularly puzzled Japanese analysts. Concentrating all weapons in the nose eliminated convergence problems that affected wing-mounted guns, but it also concentrated weight in the aircraft's forward section, requiring complex design solutions to maintain proper balance. Japanese engineers, accustomed to distributed weight arrangements that simplified structural requirements, viewed this as unnecessarily complicated. More fundamentally, Japanese military doctrine emphasized that technological superiority meant little without the warrior spirit to employ it effectively. American pilots, they believed, lacked the spiritual commitment necessary for victory in aerial combat. Reports from frontline units consistently described American fighter pilots as cautious, predictable, and overly dependent on formation tactics rather than individual skill. This assessment shaped Japanese expectations for the war's progression. While American industrial capacity might eventually produce superior numbers of aircraft, Japanese qualitative advantages in pilot training, aircraft efficiency, and tactical innovation would enable them to maintain air superiority. The vast distances of the Pacific would work in Japan's favor, preventing American forces from concentrating overwhelming numbers at decisive points. Admiral Yamamoto's inspection tour reflected this strategic confidence. As the architect of Japan's early victories, he embodied the aggressive spirit that had carried Japanese forces across the Pacific. His decision to personally visit forward bases demonstrated leadership from the front, inspiring subordinates, while gathering intelligence on American capabilities and intentions. The tour's timing, in mid-April 1943, coincided with Japanese preparations for Operation Igo, a major offensive designed to cripple American air power in the Solomons. Yamamoto planned to concentrate over 300 aircraft from carrier and land-based units, overwhelming American defenders through coordinated strikes against airfields and shipping. The operation represented Japanese confidence in their ability to regain air superiority through superior tactics and concentrated force. Yamamoto's personal involvement in planning and inspiring these operations reflected Japanese belief in the decisive importance of leadership and morale. Unlike American commanders who typically directed operations from rear headquarters, Japanese leaders frequently positioned themselves at forward bases, sharing risks with their subordinates and demonstrating personal commitment to victory. This leadership philosophy extended to aircraft design and tactical doctrine. Japanese fighters were designed to enable aggressive tactics, trading protection for performance. Pilots were trained to press attacks regardless of personal risk, trusting in their skills and their aircraft's capabilities to achieve victory. The combination of superior equipment, superior training, and superior spirit would overcome any American advantages in numbers or industrial capacity. The morning of April 18th, 1943, Admiral Yamamoto prepared for his inspection flight with complete confidence in these assumptions. His route would carry him over water controlled entirely by Japanese forces, protected by some of Japan's most experienced fighter pilots flying the world's most maneuverable fighter aircraft. No American force could possibly threaten him at such distances from their bases. Intelligence reports indicated no unusual American activity in the area. Radar installations at Japanese bases showed normal air traffic patterns. Weather conditions were excellent, providing unlimited visibility that would allow his Zero escorts to spot any approaching threats at maximum range. Every factor supported a routine flight that would demonstrate Japanese control over their sphere of the Pacific. At Rabaul Airfield, 6 Zero fighters from the 204th Air Group completed final preparations for the Escort mission. Their pilots represented the elite of Japanese naval aviation, men with hundreds of combat hours and dozens of victories against American opponents. Flight leader Lieutenant Takeshi Morizaki had personally shot down 7 American aircraft, including 2 P-38 Lightnings that had attempted to intercept previous high-value flights. The Zeros themselves embodied 19 months of combat refinement. These were not the early war A6M2 models that had achieved initial victories, but improved A6M3 variants with enhanced armor protection and more powerful engines. While still emphasizing maneuverability over protection, they incorporated lessons learned from combat against increasingly capable American opponents. Most importantly, the Zero pilots flew with complete tactical confidence. They had developed proven techniques for defeating every American fighter type, including the troublesome P-38 Lightning. The twin-engine American fighter might possess advantages in speed and firepower, but experienced Zero pilots could force it into turning combat where Japanese superiority became decisive. These tactical assumptions would be tested within hours as 18 P-38 Lightnings approached their interception point. But the Japanese escorts, Admiral Yamamoto, and the entire Imperial Japanese Navy operated under beliefs about twin-engine fighter limitations that were about to be catastrophically proven wrong. The P-38's twin engines represented more than just increased power. They embodied a completely different philosophy of air combat, one that prioritized range and survivability over the elegant efficiency that Japanese engineers prized. In less than 4 minutes of combat, this philosophical difference would demonstrate its decisive importance in ways that would reshape Japanese understanding of American capabilities. The stage was set for a collision between two incompatible visions of air power. On one side, Japanese confidence in maneuverability, pilot skill, and the proven superiority of lightweight, efficient fighters. On the other, American faith in technological solutions, overwhelming firepower, and the strategic advantages of extended range. Admiral Yamamoto's flight toward Balale would determine which philosophy truly dominated Pacific skies. But as his transport lifted off from Rabaul at 0610 hours, neither he nor his escorts understood that 18 American fighters were already airborne, flying a precisely calculated intercept course that would bring them together over the jungles of Bougainville in exactly 1 hour and 24 minutes. The mission that would prove Japanese assumptions catastrophically wrong had begun 3 days earlier in a cramped intelligence hut at Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. Navy communications specialists hunched over radio intercept equipment had decoded a message that sent shockwaves through Allied command. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, would be flying an inspection tour of forward bases on April 18th. The intercept was precise, almost impossibly detailed. Yamamoto would depart Rabaul at 0600 hours in a Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bomber, escorted by 6 Zero fighters. His destination, Balale Airfield on Bougainville Island, flight time, 1 hour and 20 minutes. The route would take him directly over the jungles of southern Bougainville, 350 miles from the nearest American base. Major John Mitchell, commanding officer of the 339th Fighter Squadron, studied the intelligence report with growing excitement and dread. Excitement, because the opportunity to eliminate Japan's most brilliant naval strategist was unprecedented. Dread, because the mission parameters seemed impossible. The intercept point lay 430 miles from Henderson Field, beyond the combat radius of every fighter in the Pacific Theater except one. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning possessed theoretical range to reach the target, but only under perfect conditions with meticulous planning. Mitchell gathered his most experienced pilots, Captain Thomas Lanphier, Lieutenant Rex Barber, Lieutenant Besby Holmes, and 14 others. What he told them seemed like fantasy. They would fly the longest fighter intercept mission in history, navigating by dead reckoning over empty ocean to arrive at a precise point at exactly the right moment to intercept Japan's most valuable target. The Lightning's twin engines made this mission theoretically possible, but theory and reality in Pacific combat were vastly different things. Each P-38 would carry 310 gallons of internal fuel, plus 2 165-gallon drop tanks, providing maximum range of approximately 1,000 miles. The mission would require 880 miles of flying, leaving virtually no margin for error, extended combat, or navigation mistakes. Mitchell spent hours calculating fuel consumption rates, wind speeds, and navigation checkpoints. The Lightnings would fly at economy cruise power, 2,000 RPM at 24 inches of manifold pressure, consuming approximately 65 gallons per hour total. At this setting, each aircraft's twin Allison V1710 engines would produce roughly 1,000 horsepower combined, providing enough speed to maintain formation while maximizing fuel efficiency. The navigation challenge was staggering. The intercept point lay over dense jungle with no recognizable landmarks visible from cruising altitude. Radio navigation aids were non-existent. The pilot would fly entirely by compass heading, airspeed, and elapsed time calculations. A single-degree error in heading would miss the target by miles. Arriving even 5 minutes early or late would mean complete mission failure. Weather added another layer of complexity. Pacific weather patterns in April were notoriously unpredictable. Headwinds could increase fuel consumption beyond mission limits. Cloud cover could prevent visual navigation. Rain squalls could scatter the formation and make the target impossible to find. Mitchell's meteorologists provided their best estimates, but acknowledged that conditions could change rapidly during the 4-hour mission. The Lightnings themselves represented cutting-edge technology, but technology that remained incompletely understood. The P-38F models assigned to the mission were among the most advanced fighters in American service, featuring improved engines, better armament, and enhanced fuel systems. However, they also incorporated complex systems that could fail in ways that might doom the mission. Each Lightning carried 4 Browning M250 caliber machine guns and 1 Hispano M1 20mm cannon mounted in the nose. This concentration of firepower eliminated convergence problems that affected wing-mounted guns, but it also required precise ammunition management. The machine guns carried 500 rounds each, while the cannon carried only 60 rounds of high-explosive ammunition. Pilots would have approximately 15 seconds of firing time before exhausting their ammunition. The twin-engine configuration that made long-range flight possible also created unique tactical challenges. Unlike single-engine fighters where engine failure meant immediate forced landing, P-38 pilots could continue flying on one engine. However, single-engine performance was marginal, especially at the weights required for maximum range missions. An engine failure during the outbound flight would force that aircraft to abort, reducing the mission's firepower. An engine failure during combat could prove fatal if Japanese fighters pressed their attack. Most critically, the Lightning's size made it highly visible to enemy fighters. The twin-boom configuration and distinctive silhouette could be identified at ranges exceeding 10 miles in clear weather. Japanese Zero pilots had learned to spot P-38 formations early and either avoid contact or position themselves advantageously before engaging. Surprise, essential for mission success, would be extremely difficult to achieve. Mitchell's planning sessions revealed the magnitude of challenges facing the mission. Intelligence estimates suggested Yamamoto's Escort would consist of 6 experienced Zero pilots from elite units based at Rabaul. These men represented the cream of Japanese naval aviation, pilots with hundreds of combat hours and dozens of confirmed victories. They would be flying A-6M30 fighters optimized for air superiority missions, carrying reduced fuel loads that enhanced maneuverability at the expense of range. The tactical mathematics were sobering. 18 P-38 seconds, carrying maximum fuel loads, would weigh approximately 8,000 pounds each at takeoff. The Zeros would weigh roughly 6,000 pounds, giving them significant advantages in climb rate, turning radius, and acceleration. If the Japanese pilots detected the approaching Lightnings early enough to position themselves advantageously, they could potentially defeat the entire American formation, despite being outnumbered 3-1. Mitchell addressed these challenges through meticulous planning and tactical innovation. The formation would approach at minimum altitude, using the Earth's curvature to mask their approach until the last possible moment. Radio silence would be maintained throughout the flight to prevent Japanese radio intercept services from detecting their presence. Navigation would rely on precise timing and compass headings calculated to account for predicted wind conditions. Most importantly, Mitchell designated specific responsibilities for each element of the formation. 4 aircraft under Captain Lanfear's command would attack Yamamoto's transport directly. The remaining 14 Lightnings under Mitchell's leadership would engage the Zero escorts, preventing them from interfering with the primary attack. This division of effort maximized the chances of mission success, while acknowledging that combat would likely develop too quickly for detailed coordination. The night before the mission, Mitchell briefed his pilots on Japanese tactics and Zero capabilities. The enemy fighters possessed decisive advantages in maneuverability below 15,000 feet, where the intercept would occur. Japanese pilots were trained to force opponents into turning combat, where the Zero's superior agility became decisive. American pilots would need to avoid prolonged engagement, using their aircraft's superior speed and firepower to achieve quick kills before escaping. These tactical briefings revealed the fundamental philosophical differences between American and Japanese fighter design. The Zero represented the ultimate expression of lightweight efficiency, sacrificing protection and structural strength for maneuverability and range. The P-38 embodied American preferences for overwhelming firepower and survivability, accepting weight penalties that reduced agility in exchange for tactical flexibility and pilot protection. At Henderson Field, ground crews worked through the night preparing the Lightnings for their unprecedented mission. Each aircraft received meticulous inspection, with particular attention to fuel systems, engine operation, and navigation equipment. Fuel tanks were topped off to maximum capacity. External tanks were mounted and tested, and ammunition was loaded with specialized rounds designed for maximum effectiveness against both aircraft and personnel targets. The selection of ammunition reflected careful analysis of the mission's requirements. Standard ball ammunition would be effective against aircraft structures, but might not inflict decisive damage on heavily built bombers like Yamamoto's G4M transport. Armor-piercing rounds could penetrate critical components, but might pass through lightly built Zero fighters without causing sufficient damage. The final load consisted of a mixture designed to handle both target types effectively. Weather reconnaissance flights launched before dawn on April 18th provided updated meteorological information. Conditions were favorable but not ideal. Visibility exceeded 10 miles at all altitudes, allowing long-range target acquisition, but also making the American formation visible to Japanese observers. Wind speeds were within acceptable limits, though slightly higher than optimal from the northwest. Cloud cover was minimal, eliminating navigation obstacles but providing no concealment for the approaching fighters. At 0400 hours, pilots began their final preparations. Each man carried emergency survival equipment, including inflatable life rafts, emergency rations, and signaling devices. Over the vast Pacific, a forced landing meant ditching in shark-infested waters hundreds of miles from rescue. The Lightning's twin engines provided some insurance against mechanical failure, but couldn't eliminate the risks entirely. The complexity of coordinating 18 aircraft for simultaneous takeoff from Henderson Field's limited facilities required precise timing. Engines were started in sequence to prevent overloading the field's electrical systems. Aircraft taxied to predetermined positions, forming up in the order they would maintain throughout the mission. Navigation equipment was synchronized, radios were tested, and final weather updates were distributed. At 0700 hours, Major Mitchell's Lightning began its takeoff roll. Behind him, 17 more P-38 seconds followed at 30-second intervals, their twin Allison engines roaring as heavily loaded aircraft struggled into the dawn sky. By 0715, the entire formation was airborne, climbing slowly to cruising altitude while burning precious fuel with every minute of flight. The navigation began immediately. Mitchell's predetermined course would take the formation northwest from Guadalcanal, then southwest around the southern tip of New Georgia Island to avoid Japanese radar installations. From there, they would fly almost due west toward Bougainville, timing their arrival to coincide with Yamamoto's expected approach to Balali airfield. Radio silence was absolute. Navigation relied entirely on Mitchell's calculations, compass headings, and elapsed time. The formation flew in loose echelon, spread across several miles of sky to reduce vulnerability to concentrated attack while maintaining visual contact between aircraft. Altitude was maintained at 50 feet above the ocean surface, low enough to avoid radar detection, but high enough to provide reasonable safety margins. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The first hour of flight passed without incident. The Lightnings droned steadily westward, their pilots scanning constantly for Japanese aircraft while monitoring engine temperatures, fuel consumption, and navigation checkpoints. The twin engines that made this mission possible created their own challenges. Each pilot had to monitor twice as many engine parameters, watching oil pressure, cylinder head temperature, and fuel flow for both power plants simultaneously. Fuel management became critical as the mission progressed. The external drop tanks would be jettisoned when empty, reducing drag and weight while providing maximum maneuverability for combat. However, the timing of tank jettison required careful calculation. Drop the tanks too early, and the aircraft might not have sufficient fuel to return home. Drop them too late, and the additional weight and drag could prove fatal in combat. As the formation approached the halfway point, Mitchell's calculations showed they were exactly on schedule. The navigation had been perfect, the engines were running smoothly, and weather conditions remained favorable. But the most dangerous phase of the mission lay ahead. Soon, they would enter airspace where Japanese fighters might appear at any moment. The psychological pressure on the pilots was enormous. They were flying the longest fighter mission in history, navigating by dead reckoning over hostile waters toward a target that might not appear. If Yamamoto's flight schedule had changed, if the intelligence was incorrect, if Japanese security had detected the American intercept plan, the entire mission could end in failure or disaster. At 0830 hours, the formation began its final approach toward the intercept point. Mitchell's calculations showed Yamamoto's transport should appear within 10 minutes, flying northeast toward Balale airfield. The Lightnings climbed slightly, gaining altitude for tactical advantage while remaining low enough to avoid detection by Japanese radar installations on Bougainville. The moment of truth was approaching. 18 American fighters, flying aircraft whose twin engines had carried them farther than any previous fighter mission, were about to test whether American engineering philosophy could triumph over Japanese tactical doctrine. The next few minutes would determine whether the P-38's revolutionary design represented the future of air combat or merely an expensive failure. Admiral Yamamoto's G-4M bomber was now visible on the horizon, exactly where Mitchell's calculations had predicted. Behind it flew 6 Zero fighters, their pilots confident in their ability to protect Japan's most valuable naval commander. They had no idea that their fundamental assumptions about twin-engine fighter limitations were about to be proven catastrophically wrong. The Lightning's twin engines had carried 18 American fighters across 400 miles of ocean with perfect navigation and precise timing. Now, those same engines would power an attack that would eliminate one of Japan's most brilliant strategists and demonstrate that American industrial philosophy could project lethal force across distances that Japanese planners considered impossible. The collision between two incompatible visions of air power was about to begin. Japanese confidence in lightweight efficiency versus American faith in overwhelming capability. The next 4 minutes would determine which philosophy truly dominated Pacific skies. 0834 hours. Lieutenant Rex Barber's eyes locked onto 2 dark specks approaching from the northwest, exactly where Major Mitchell's calculations had predicted. After 2 hours and 18 minutes of navigation across empty ocean, the P-38 Lightning formation had achieved what Japanese planners considered impossible, a precise intercept of Admiral Yamamoto's flight over enemy-controlled territory. Bogies, 11 o'clock high, Barber called over the radio, breaking 2 hours of absolute silence. The Japanese formation was clearly visible now, one large Mitsubishi G-4M bomber flying at approximately 4,000 feet, with 6 Zero fighters spread in protective formation around it. They were proceeding northeast toward Balale airfield, completely unaware that 18 American fighters had been waiting for this exact moment. Captain Thomas Lanphier, leading the 4-plane attack element, immediately began climbing toward the bomber. His orders were clear: ignore everything else and destroy Yamamoto's transport. The remaining 14 Lightnings under Major Mitchell's command would handle the escort fighters. What happened next would demonstrate why the P-38's twin engines represented a revolution in Pacific air combat. Escort pilots spotted the American formation within seconds. Flight leader Lieutenant Takeshi Morizaki had been scanning the horizon continuously, and the distinctive twin-boom silhouette of approaching P-38 seconds was unmistakable even at long range. But what he saw defied every tactical assumption Japanese pilots had developed about twin-engine fighter operations. The Lightnings weren't lumbering along at high altitude as previous encounters had suggested. They were climbing rapidly from sea level, their twin Allison engines producing 2,600 horsepower that pulled the heavily loaded fighters upward at rates that matched or exceeded the Zero's climb performance. More critically, they were already in perfect position for attack, having achieved complete tactical surprise through navigation precision that Japanese commanders had considered impossible. Morizaki's reaction reflected 18 months of successful combat experience. He immediately turned his formation toward the Lightnings, intending to force them into the turning combat where Japanese superiority was decisive. The 6 Zeros banked sharply left, their lightweight construction and powerful engines providing acceleration that had defeated every previous American fighter type. But the P-38 pilots didn't turn to meet the Japanese attack. Instead, they continued climbing at maximum power, using their superior speed to dictate the engagement terms. The Lightning's twin engines provided not just range for long-distance missions, but tactical flexibility that single-engine fighters couldn't match. While the Zeros turned to intercept, the Americans gained altitude and speed that would prove decisive in the coming battle. Lieutenant Besby Holmes, flying wing position in Lanfear's attack element, watched the bomber growing larger in his gun sight. The G4M was a large aircraft, nearly 65 feet long with a 99-foot wingspan, but it was also lightly constructed. Intelligence reports indicated minimal armor protection and fuel tanks that could explode catastrophically when hit by incendiary ammunition. Holmes had trained extensively with the P-38's nose-mounted armament system. Unlike wing-mounted guns that required precise range estimation for convergence, the Lightning's weapons were perfectly aligned with the pilot's line of sight. The 4 Browning 50 caliber machine guns and single Hispano 20mm cannon would place every round exactly where the pilot aimed, with no convergence calculations or range estimation required. The tactical advantage was enormous. Holmes could open fire at maximum effective range, knowing that his bullets would strike exactly where his gun sight indicated. The concentrated firepower, approximately 3,000 rounds per minute combined, could destroy any aircraft with just a few seconds of accurate shooting. Japanese pilots, accustomed to American fighters with wing-mounted guns that were effective only at close range, had never faced such devastating long-range accuracy. At 08:36 hours, Holmes opened fire at 400 yards range. His 50 caliber bullets and 20mm explosive shells converged on the bomber's right engine, which erupted in flames immediately. The G4M's unprotected fuel systems, designed for maximum range rather than combat survivability, created a spectacular fireball that consumed the entire wing section within seconds. Captain Lanfear, approaching from a slightly different angle, added his firepower to the attack. His bullets raked the bomber's fuselage, where Admiral Yamamoto sat in the passenger compartment. The concentrated fire from 2 P-38 seconds, 8 machine guns and 2 cannons firing simultaneously tore the transport aircraft apart in less than 10 seconds of shooting. The bomber rolled inverted and plunged toward the jungle below, carrying Japan's most brilliant naval strategist to his death. The primary mission objective had achieved with devastating efficiency, but the battle was far from over. 6 experienced Zero pilots were now fully engaged with the remaining American fighters, and their reaction would test every assumption about twin-engine fighter combat effectiveness. Morizaki's Zeros had closed to firing range during the attack on Yamamoto's bomber. The Japanese pilots opened fire with their wing-mounted machine guns and cannons, expecting to destroy the P-38 seconds through superior maneuverability and close-range gunnery. What they discovered instead was that the Lightning's twin engines provided defensive advantages as significant as their offensive capabilities. Lieutenant Doug Canning's P-38 took multiple hits from a Zero attack, with 20mm shells striking his port engine and severing control cables. In any single-engine fighter, such damage would have been immediately fatal, forcing the pilot to bail out or attempt a deadstick landing. But Canning's Lightning continued flying on its starboard engine alone, while the port engine's destruction actually reduced the aircraft's weight and drag. The twin-engine configuration that Japanese pilots had dismissed as unnecessarily complex proved to be the Lightning's greatest survival asset. Canning was able to maintain formation speed on one engine, continue fighting with undiminished firepower, and eventually return to Henderson Field for a safe landing. His survival demonstrated that American engineering philosophy prioritized pilot protection and mission completion over the elegant efficiency that Japanese designers preferred. Zero pilot Petty Officer Kenji Yanagiya, an experienced combat veteran with 12 confirmed victories, found himself unable to achieve the quick kill that Japanese tactics demanded. He had positioned himself perfectly for a deflection shot on Lieutenant Julius Jacobson's P-38, leading the target precisely and firing his entire ammunition load in a concentrated burst. His shells struck the Lightning's fuselage, wings, and tail surfaces, creating visible damage that should have been catastrophic. But Jacobson's aircraft continued flying. The P-38's robust construction, designed to withstand the stresses of high-speed flight and heavy combat loads, absorbed damage that would have destroyed lighter fighters. Structural redundancy meant that primary load paths could fail without causing immediate structural collapse. Self-sealing fuel tanks prevented fire even when punctured by cannon shells. Most critically, the twin engines continued operating even when surrounding structures were severely damaged. Yanagiya's tactical situation became desperate. He had expended his ammunition without achieving a kill, leaving him defenseless against other American fighters. Standard Japanese doctrine assumed that accurate gunnery would destroy enemy aircraft quickly, allowing pilots to engage multiple targets during single missions. Against the P-38's, this assumption proved catastrophically wrong. Lieutenant Barber, having completed his attack on Yamamoto's bomber, turned his attention to the Zero fighters. His tactical position was perfect high speed, good altitude, and full ammunition load against enemies who had already expended much of their firepower. The P-38's nose-mounted guns gave him decisive advantages in the developing battle. Barber's first target was the Zero that had attacked Canning's Lightning. The Japanese pilot, focused on finishing off the apparently crippled P-38, never saw Barber's approach. The Lightning's concentrated firepower struck the Zero's engine and fuel tank simultaneously, creating an explosion that tore the lightweight fighter apart instantly. The pilot had no opportunity to bail out. The destruction was so rapid and complete that the remaining Zero pilots began breaking off their attacks. They had been trained to expect extended combat, where superior maneuverability would eventually provide winning opportunities. Instead, they faced American fighters that could absorb their best shots while returning fire that destroyed anything it touched. Petty Officer Shoichi Sugita, flying the Zero closest to Balale Airfield, attempted to escape by diving toward the jungle canopy. His aircraft's superior power-to-weight ratio should have provided the acceleration needed to outrun the heavier P-38's, but the Lightning pilots didn't attempt to follow him in a turning dive. Instead, they used their superior speed to cut off his escape route, forcing him into a head-on engagement where their firepower advantage was decisive. Lieutenant Holmes caught Sugita in a climbing turn, the Zero's pilot pulling maximum G-forces to avoid the Americans' guns. But the P-38's nose-mounted armament eliminated the deflection shooting that wing-mounted guns required. Holmes simply placed his gun sight on the target and fired, his bullets and shells converging exactly where he aimed, regardless of the target's maneuvering. The Zero disintegrated under the concentrated fire, its lightweight construction providing no protection against 850 caliber bullets and 20mm explosive shells striking simultaneously. Sugita's aircraft simply came apart in mid-air, pieces scattered across several square miles of jungle canopy. Within 4 minutes of initial contact, Admiral Yamamoto's entire formation had been destroyed or scattered. The bomber carrying Japan's most valuable naval strategist lay burning in the Bougainville jungle. 4 of the 6 Escort Zeros had been shot down, their pilots killed instantly by the P-38's devastating firepower. The 2 surviving Japanese fighters were fleeing toward Rabaul, too damaged and low on ammunition to continue fighting. The American formation began its withdrawal immediately. Fuel consumption during combat had been enormous, with the twin engines operating at maximum power throughout the engagement. Several lightnings showed battle damage from Japanese fire, but none had been lost. More importantly, every P-38 retained sufficient fuel to reach Henderson Field, demonstrating the twin-engine configuration's critical advantage in extended-range operations. The flight home took 2 hours and 47 minutes, with the formation maintaining radio silence to prevent Japanese forces from tracking their route. Damaged aircraft received assistance from undamaged wingmen, but all 18 Lightnings that had launched the mission returned safely to Guadalcanal. The contrast with Japanese losses was stark: 6 experienced pilots and their irreplaceable commander dead, against 0 American casualties. Intelligence analysis of the mission results began immediately upon the formation's return. The strategic implications extended far beyond the elimination of a single Japanese leader, however important. The P-38's performance had demonstrated American capability to project decisive force across distances that Japanese planners considered operationally impossible. The navigation precision required for the intercept had been extraordinary. Major Mitchell's calculations had placed 18 fighters at exactly the right location at precisely the correct time, despite flying 430 miles over empty ocean using only compass headings and elapsed time. This achievement suggested that American units could strike targets anywhere within the P-38's range, making no Japanese installation truly safe from attack. More fundamentally, the Lightning's combat performance had validated American engineering philosophy in ways that would reshape Pacific air warfare. The twin engines that Japanese analysts had dismissed as unnecessary complexity had proven decisive in every phase of the mission. They provided the range for deep penetration strikes, the reliability for extended overwater flight, and the survivability that allowed damaged aircraft to return home. Japanese reaction to Yamamoto's death reflected growing recognition that American capabilities exceeded their previous estimates. Intelligence reports from Rabaul indicated immediate changes in Japanese operational procedures. High-value flights were suspended indefinitely. Escort requirements were doubled. Flight routes were randomized to prevent precise interception. Most significantly, Japanese commanders acknowledged that nowhere within P-38 range could be considered safe. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots was equally profound. The Zero fighters that had dominated Pacific skies for 18 months suddenly seemed vulnerable to American fighters they had previously dismissed as inferior. The P-38's ability to absorb damage that destroyed Japanese aircraft while returning fire that obliterated anything it struck represented a fundamental shift in combat mathematics. Fighter pilot training in Japan began emphasizing different tactics for engaging twin-engine American fighters. Pilots were taught to avoid extended combat, to strike quickly and disengage before the P-38's advantages could become decisive. Most importantly, they were warned that the Lightning's apparent vulnerability was deceptive. Its twin engines and robust construction allowed it to continue fighting under conditions that would incapacitate single-engine fighters. The mission's success also validated American industrial philosophy in broader terms. While Japanese engineers had pursued elegant efficiency, accepting vulnerability to achieve performance, American designers had chosen overwhelming capability at the expense of weight and complexity. The P-38's twin engines represented this philosophy perfectly. More power, more fuel, more guns, more protection, regardless of the weight penalties involved. This approach extended beyond aircraft design to operational concepts. American commanders could plan missions that Japanese leaders considered impossible because American equipment was designed to operate under extreme conditions. The Lightning's range allowed strikes against targets beyond Japanese defensive planning. Its reliability enabled precision navigation over vast ocean distances. Its survivability ensured that mission success didn't require accepting catastrophic losses. Intelligence reports captured from Japanese sources after Yamamoto's death revealed the extent of Japanese misconceptions about American capabilities. Documents found at Rabaul showed that Japanese planners had calculated maximum P-38 combat radius at approximately 200 miles, half the actual distance to the intercept point. This miscalculation had direct strategic consequences, leaving critical targets undefended because they were considered beyond American reach. The technological implications of the mission extended to future aircraft development. The success of twin-engine fighters in long-range operations influenced American planning for subsequent aircraft types. The P-61 Black Widow night fighter, the P-82 Twin Mustang, Escort fighter, and even early jet designs incorporated lessons learned from the P-38's Pacific operations. Japanese response included accelerated development of their own twin-engine fighters, but these programs suffered from the same philosophical limitations that had initially dismissed American designs. Japanese twin-engine fighters like the Kawasaki Ki-45 and Nakajima J-1N emphasized speed and maneuverability over the range and survivability that made American designs effective. The strategic balance in the Pacific had shifted decisively. American forces now possessed the capability to strike Japanese installations throughout the Solomon Islands and New Guinea. The psychological advantage of Japanese pilot superiority had been shattered. Most critically, Japanese leadership recognized that their assumptions about American technological capabilities had been fundamentally flawed. Admiral Yamamoto's death became a symbol of this broader transformation. The man who had orchestrated Pearl Harbor, who understood American industrial capacity better than most Japanese leaders, had been eliminated by American technology that exceeded even his informed estimates of American capabilities. His death demonstrated that Japanese intelligence had systematically underestimated American engineering achievements. The mission's aftermath revealed additional advantages of the P-38's twin-engine configuration. Post-flight maintenance showed that several Lightnings had suffered engine damage during combat, but their twin power plants had allowed them to complete the mission safely. Single-engine fighters with similar damage would have been forced to ditch in the ocean, with pilots either killed or captured. Fuel consumption analysis indicated that the mission had operated at the absolute limit of the P-38's range capability. Several aircraft landed with fuel reserves measured in minutes rather than hours, but the twin engines had provided just enough efficiency to complete the 880-mile mission, demonstrating that American engineering margins were precisely calculated rather than conservatively excessive. The precision of American planning and execution impressed even Japanese observers. Intercepted communications from Rabaul indicated that Japanese intelligence officers initially refused to believe that American fighters could have navigated so accurately over such distances. The mathematical precision required for the intercept seemed beyond American capabilities, suggesting that Japanese estimates of American technological sophistication had been systematically too low. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. The long-term consequences of the mission extended far beyond Yamamoto's death. Japanese defensive planning throughout the Pacific had to be completely reconsidered based on demonstrated American capabilities. Installations that had been positioned beyond estimated American fighter range now required massive reinforcement or abandonment. The strategic geography of the Pacific had effectively contracted, bringing previously safe Japanese positions within American striking distance. Modern aviation historians studying the Yamamoto intercept consistently emphasize the mission's technological rather than tactical significance. While the elimination of Japan's most capable naval strategist was strategically important, the demonstration of American long-range precision strike capability was revolutionary. The P-38's twin engines had enabled a new form of warfare that rendered traditional defensive calculations obsolete. The philosophical implications proved equally lasting. American engineering philosophy, emphasizing overwhelming capability over elegant efficiency, had achieved decisive validation. Japanese pursuit of lightweight perfection, while producing magnificent aircraft like the Zero, had failed to anticipate the importance of range, survivability, and sustained combat effectiveness in Pacific operations. Aircraft designers throughout the world studied the mission's lessons. The importance of twin engines for long-range operations became accepted doctrine, influencing fighter development for decades. Modern aircraft like the F-15 Eagle and F-14 Tomcat incorporated twin engines, partly because of lessons learned from the P-38's Pacific success. The human dimension of the mission remained equally significant. 18 American pilots had flown the longest fighter intercept in history, navigated with extraordinary precision over hostile territory, and eliminated Japan's most valuable naval commander without suffering a single casualty. Their success demonstrated not just technological superiority, but the training, planning, and execution capabilities that would characterize American air operations throughout the war. The P-38 Lightning's twin engines had carried American air power across 400 miles of ocean to eliminate Admiral Yamamoto and fundamentally alter the strategic balance in the Pacific. Japanese confidence in lightweight, efficient fighters had been shattered by American faith in overwhelming technological capability. The forked-tail devil had proven that twin engines weren't a liability, but the key to projecting decisive force across the vast distances that defined Pacific warfare. In the end, the mission that eliminated Admiral Yamamoto validated every assumption American engineers had made about twin-engine fighter design. Range, reliability, survivability, and devastating firepower had combined to achieve what Japanese planners considered impossible. The P-38's twin engines had not just powered the longest fighter mission in history, they had powered a revolution in air combat that would echo through the remainder of the Pacific War and beyond. The Lightning had proven that American industrial philosophy could triumph over Japanese tactical excellence, that technological solutions could overcome skill and experience, and that twin engines represented the future of long-range air superiority. Admiral Yamamoto's death was just the beginning of what those twin engines would accomplish in the skies over the Pacific.